Glazer has won every award you can win in Austin. He's an Austin American Statesman Social Media Award winner. He is the Austin Chronicle's Best of Award winner. He was named Austin 40 Under 40 finalist. He's won the WeWork Creator Award. He's won the Special Community Giver Award. He's in Austin Inno's 50 on Fire, and I'm sure a few more that I have missed. Matt has worked at the Texas State Capitol, founded Progress Texas. He was the executive director of the Austin Young Chamber of Commerce. And most notably for the purpose of this event, Matt has worked on dozens of campaigns across the nation, from the courthouse to the White House and back again. Matt has been with Campaign Bootcamp since there has been a Campaign Bootcamp, and above all else, Matt is accessible. Please get in contact with him. Find him on Slack, ask him questions in the chat. We'll be pinging in and giving Matt questions throughout the session. Pick his brain. He's an amazing, accomplished individual who has earned his accomplishments, and he's here today to work with y'all. So please, bug Matt. With that, Matt, I'm going to spotlight the video over to you and give you the ability to screen share, and expect me hopping in with some questions throughout your session.
Perfect. Okay. Technology usually works pretty well, but I'm going to make sure. So at this point, you should have my presentation shared. Is that correct? Is that working?
That's not the case on my end yet.
Of course not. It says screen shared has failed to start. Please try again later.
Perfect.
Let me try one more thing. And while I'm trying this, know that I'm just really grateful for that introduction and also very scared to follow up and try to live into it. So I'm glad that the technology is vexing us a little bit, because at least it manages expectations. So therefore, that being said, is the screen share working now? And Bianca, thank you for your help on this.
It is. If we see what you see exactly though, which is 3 full screens and your presenter notes.
Okay, so I need to flip that real quick and just hold with me for 1 second. Is that better?
That's perfect, Matt.
Wonderful. Okay. And I also saw Tyler's note. He is a very accomplished speaker and presenter as well. And please do pepper me with questions. Otherwise, we're going to go real short, and that's fine. But this is meant to be an opportunity to overgeneralize in a presentation and then be specific with you all in questions and answers. So I'm looking at my screen, and I hate that I don't have the technology to sort of look at you directly in your face, but know that I'm here and I'm present for y'all. So as Cole mentioned, like, why me a little bit into this conversation. I'm going to start with the oldest piece of the timeline and then sort of move forward. I was an undergrad at Trinity University, and I was blessed in part to decide that I either wanted to be a doctor or get into politics. I came up in a life where ER was on TV, and so was the West Wing. And I remember my mom took me to Ben Taub Hospital to go see a surgery when you could still do those kinds of things. And the sight of blood made me literally pass out at Ben Taub Hospital. So I knew early in my life that I wasn't going to be a doctor. So I decided to go into politics, and I went into politics doing campaigns as a volunteer at a very young age. And I think there are some people that are watching this on Facebook Live I was blessed to have as professors and guide me and push me to do those things. And so I participated in Campaign Bootcamp the first or second year as a participant, as a young person looking to get into campaigns. And that launched me into my career. I then went in to work with the Howard Dean campaign at the presidential level that then turned into the John Kerry campaign, and was bounced around the country for about 3 years. Came back to my home state of Texas and started working on multi-issue advocacy organizations and campaigns before, in the ripe old age of 29, becoming the first-time executive director for Progress Texas, which I was too young to know that that was too young. So I did campaigns and nonprofits for about 15 or 20 years before now I'm a consultant for both for-profit companies and nonprofits. So I work at Mission Capital and Blue Sky Partners. So that's why I'm here. Those are my credentials. It also means that I am pretty partisan, and I'm going to try not to let that bleed in too much today, but we're going to try to answer some of these key questions for anybody, regardless of politics, regardless if you're working on issue campaigns or you want to work at the presidential level or the local level, whether you want to be a candidate or you want to work for a candidate. these questions that we're going to go through. What is right for you? What exactly is campaign management? What do the basics of a campaign look like? What does success look like? And I'm going to tell you right now, it's not winning or losing. And how will you learn and grow to go from campaign to campaign? One of the other things that you usually get told when we do these in person, and I know that these are different times, and so we can't do that, is I also want to just dispel the myth that you all are normal. You are not. And I love you all very dearly, and I cannot wait to connect with you. But the fact that you're giving up a full weekend to have this conversation, the fact that you are bought in enough at your age, regardless of what age it is, if you're 50 or you're 20, it doesn't matter, that you are so interested that you want to know more about what it means to run a campaign, that is uncommon. So that's great to lean into that, and it's empowering. But also, it means that when we talk about generalized things, we're not necessarily talking about things that feel right to us all, because we read more news, we take in more things, we are more plugged in, we know who our city council member is, we know who our state rep is, we know how to navigate that system in a way. So that's not normal for most people. But so the first question that people ask is like, how do I become a campaign manager? Is it right for me? Is it campaign management the right fit? And I don't know the answer, but I can tell you that there are three things when you think about whether or not campaign management is the right fit. Reptile Rico kind of hit on this a little bit. It's mobilize versus organize. I thought that was a great point. I actually hadn't heard that before. And the idea that campaign management at the partisan level is this idea about getting your base out. And we're going to talk about that more. But at an issue advocacy level, where you see that woman holding advocacy teams, right? If you're doing nonprofit or advocacy work, it's about organizing, building a new movement. And both, if you're doing campaign work as a candidate or you're doing issue advocacy work, the blocking and tackling is the same. And on top of that, they require sometimes just volunteers. And maybe that might be the entry point, is that you need to knock on doors or you want to go shadow somebody. So what do you do to prioritize when you're a candidate early in the campaign? Like, what are the first couple things you do? Is it fundraising? Is it outreach? Is it public events? Is it FaceTime? And I'm going to hint that, like, as you're looking at your worksheets, this is a very important question. What do you do to prioritize? Well, what you do is you start figuring out what your deficiencies are. If you're a candidate, it's probably fundraising. The very first thing you need to do is hire a fundraising team and raise a boatload of cash. If you are an advocacy team, if you're a nonprofit, the very first thing you got to do is start getting an organizing group together. And it's less about fundraising, it's more about mobilizing. And so it depends on which avenue you're kind of getting started in. And again, please ask questions if I'm glossing over anything too quickly. So the question sometimes comes up is like, do I run for something or do I run something? Well, I ask clients all the time with this. If you're in the Austin area, you know that there's a special election going on. And so I had the fortune to talk to a bunch of people who were eyeing the Senate District 14 race, since Kirk Watson is going to Houston to launch the public policy school. And these are the questions I ask them. What do you care about? Why? Why you? What impact will you have? What experience do you have? If you're thinking about running for office and you haven't done anything in your life except for just wake up, live your life, go to bed, that's not a bad life, but that might not give you enough experience to be the candidate. Can you support someone else or something else? Are your values aligned with what you're saying you're trying to go do? And I think most importantly, should you? And what I mean by should you is, are you willing to do the work? Reptile Rico literally walked through his entire district on foot, knocking on doors. Not to mention the 8 hours a day he probably did phone banking and dialing for dollars. Not to mention hiring a staff and making a staff empowered to go run his campaign and do direct mail and do the marketing pieces. Not to mention the people on his team that were going and cutting turf or identifying voters, right? So if you've got a family, if you've got to go support somebody, is this the right time for you? Should you make this sacrifice? And at the best, you have a 50-50 chance of winning. So that's okay. But if someone else is out there and you can go align with them and you can work with them and you can support somebody else that is values aligned with you, does it need to be you? And you can still say yes with all those other things and you say, I want to do this anyway. And that's okay. There's no judgment there. But these are the questions I always ask people to ask themselves. Okay, so you've gone through it and you're like, yes, I'm going to go do this. I want to be a campaign manager, or I'm going to go be a candidate and I need to go hire a campaign manager. What is campaign management? One of my favorite quotes is from Dolores Huerta. You could really belong to a group of people, and with other people, you could really make some significant changes through the electoral process, of course, by registering people to vote and by supporting good people who are running for office. For me, it was like I had found the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. When I see this quote, the thing I'm constantly reflecting on is my best friends come from the campaign work I've done. The thing I constantly reflect is that the reason I have been able to start nonprofits and the reason I have been able to start companies and work for places like WeWork, which was a dumpster fire, is because I had built these relationships from people in my community. And I had built these relationships from people that had gone to war with me. You're never going to make better friends than the people that are sitting there arm in arm during a debate that you feel passionately about at the state capitol, or waking up at 8 a.m. to go to bed at 2 a.m. because you got to go get that GOTV turf cut, right? Like there's nothing more empowering and exciting about that. And I think of those in my career as the highest highs and sometimes the lowest lows. And so this quote over speaks to me because I want to think about the camaraderie of the team that I'm around myself with. But what does it actually mean to do campaigns? Okay, so political management is super easy, right? It's not rocket science. It's broad, it's ever evolving. What it looks like now looks very differently than when I did it 15 years ago, 20 years ago. But the elements of it are the same. It's advertising, it's grassroots, it's research, it's advocacy, it's fundraising, and it's polling. Those words change their meaning, but the heart of what management is that you are the person at the heart of it, organizing all of these elements and keeping all of this information straight in your head. That's it. So if these are all interesting to you, campaign management or nonprofit advocacy management is probably a good path for you. So what do the campaigns actually look like? Because I'm telling you everything at a high level right now. Okay, so not that complicated, right? Again, it's nuanced, but it's not that hard. So what are your first two campaign hires? Why do you need to think about that? Well, if you're defining victory, if you're evaluating the campaign timeline, the climate, you're charting your course, you're choosing your influence and your strategies, you're thinking about your messaging and you're managing the campaign, it looks like your first hires are probably going to be on the messaging side, right? No, that's wrong. You got to get the resources to make sure that you can execute this strategy, right? So the number one person you're probably hiring, if you're the candidate, is a campaign manager or consultant and a fundraiser to give you the resources and define how to move forward. If you're a campaign manager or you're working at a nonprofit or you're working on an issue, okay, well, that piece is taken care of. You don't need to worry about the campaign manager. That check, right? So what are the next pieces you're thinking through? You're probably thinking about either somebody who's organizing volunteers or fundraising, if you're not an organization, to make sure that you have the resources to get to the state capitol, to bring people in, to go from place A to place B. And if you don't need to worry about money, right? Because you're working on something in your backyard, everybody's printing their own things, they're doing stuff, and it's just like this small local issue advocacy campaign. It's probably somebody who can go out there and identify who your top, like grass top supporters are and keeping them activated. That's it. So don't think about overcomplicating this stuff, right? You start with the top of the pyramid and you move down.
Hey, Matt, we have a quick question coming in via text. You mentioned earlier the difference between campaigns and nonprofit work. When you're making hires in one or the other, is there a difference? Do you prioritize one thing over another in the two different worlds? Do they really blend together?
They blend together in some ways. That's a great question. But the difference is that a campaign doesn't last forever, and a nonprofit theoretically should, right? So in a nonprofit, you have an executive director or a CEO. You have a finance department or a fundraiser. And these people live and work that mission every single day, regardless of whether it's the first Tuesday in November or not, right? It doesn't end. But if you are working an issue campaign, you may not know who the voters are on your issue. You may need some really basic stuff like polling, right? Because you don't know. One campaign I worked on in 2005 was Proposition 2. And this is, I'm gonna go back to, it was 2005. I was the statewide field director. And Proposition 2, for those of you who don't know, was one of the marriage amendments that was bouncing through the country. We got it a year later because of the way our legislature works. So in 2005, I was out crisscrossing the state for Equality Texas. At the time, it was called LGRL, the Lesbian Gay Rights Lobby. They never run a statewide campaign. They had a finance director, they had a CEO, they had field and volunteer organizing because they were a lobby and advocacy organization, but they had never knocked on doors. They had never tried to mobilize people. Granted, we lost that race 75-25. Like, I'm not trying to say like we were, trying to be cutting edge, but what we also tried to do is we thought about the districts that could be won long term, right? So where were the state reps or the state senators that were in urban areas that we could win in that area 51-49 and start building momentum? Well, if you're working on a candidate-based campaign, you can't do that. If Reptile Rico thinks about winning just one neighborhood and not the broader election, he's going to lose the election. Equality Texas could go through and focus in on winning, at the time, Dan Branch's state rep seat, and build a movement in Oak Cliff, Dallas, which now seems like super easy and like thoughtful. Like, oh yeah, you guys, that was an easy one. It was 2005. We didn't know that was an easy choice. We didn't know that's where the LGBT community was. We had to go find them. And so we were able to go build this one small area and then iterate out. Fundraising was definitely a thing that we had to think about, but we had the team already because LGRL, Equality Texas, existed, and it still exists. But what it didn't have was polling. What it didn't have was a voter database. What it didn't have was volunteers that were doing electoral work. So our hiring strategy was very different. I'm going to pause just for a second to make sure that I got the answer that whoever asked wanted, and we can go into more detail, because usually in person, I'm like, does that help? Like, can we go into more nuance? So I want to just pause for a second. Cool.
I haven't been told no yet, so I'm going to go with yes.
That sounds great.
I'll ping back in.
Sip of water. So let's talk about the campaign timeline. And this is much more about electoral campaigns than it is about issue campaigns. Because again, if you're working in a nonprofit, if you're working on an issue, you have a longer timeline that you can work on. But if you're thinking about the campaign as an individual, this is kind of what you got to think about, right? It's prep and execution, right? It's mobilizing and organizing. So the very first thing is just considering and exploring whether or not you want to do this, which is not a small thing to talk about. Do you want to run? Will you make that sacrifice? Is this the life you want to live for a 6 months, 9 months, a year, 18 months, the rest of your life if you win, right? Like, this is a change in your lifestyle. So you consider it, you explore it, then you announce. Then really campaign is split between two things: campaigning, organizing, GOTV, mobilizing. And I just love that distinction that Reptile Rico brought up. So in the campaign fee side of things, what you're doing is you're asking people, do you even know who Matt Glazer is? Can I tell you a little about him? What do you need to know? Would you like to come to this event? It's much more persuasion. It's much more information, right? Hey, did you know that Matt Glazer's opponent kicks puppies and hates babies, right? Like, you're really trying to draw that contrast. GOTV means get out the vote. And get out the vote is when you're talking to your ones and twos. And if anybody has done a campaign, you know what that means, right? Your ones and twos are the people that say, I am going to die to go vote for this person, or I'm highly considering dying to go vote for this person. I'm going to go out there. Absolutely, you can count on me. And you just start watching, did they vote or not, right? Because you can do that. That's all GOTV is.
On that note, Matt, we have a question from Lillian asking where and how campaigns access a voter database.
Yeah, that's a great question too. So on the Democratic side, I can only speak to the Democratic side because the technology on the Republican side has changed. And so I would encourage you to pester Tyler in the Slack or the chat to ask how he does it. But in the Democratic side, we use this thing called the Voter Action Network, which is called the VAN for short. It is a system by which all Democrats unify their outreach and are identifying people to go talk to. It's mostly registered voters with a little bit more data on it, but it's just registered voters. Getting a list of registered voters, though, is as easy as going to the county clerk's office or the Secretary of State's office. You can do that in any state. You can do that at any time if you don't want to use a partisan list. So if you're doing a nonpartisan race, you can also just go do those two things too. Go to the county clerk, go to the Secretary of State, and get a list of all registered voters in whatever area you want. And you just start knocking on their doors, you start making phone calls. Flip side of that is, Lillian, this is why this is a much more nuanced question, and this is why I love the questions, is let's say you're doing something that's a little bit different. Let's say you're trying to do a voter registration campaign. That's a little harder. You don't want to talk to people that are already registered to vote, right? And you can't just say, I'm going to talk to people that aren't registered to vote, because that's a little bit more complicated, right? So when you're doing something like that, again, those issue campaigns are a little different. You got to go find places that have a lower percentage of registered voters, which you can do through the county clerk, and then just sort of either knock on doors, or you go into a big public space, which I'm sure you've seen at Thundercloud or HEB or whatever, when people still went out in public, and you would just be like, have you registered or have you updated your address? So the data piece is always complicated. And so, one of the questions on the worksheet is going to be, what is your target voting audience, right? And again, this depends on whether or not you're talking about an issue, a candidate, or a cause, right? So if you're talking about voter registration, you're probably trying to figure out a way to find and identify big areas where people are not registered to vote. If you're talking about a cause, you're trying to find and identify ways to get people that agree with you out there and mobilize and start to show that and spread that. So think about Everytown USA, think about Black Lives Matter, think about whatever cause is important to you. Those issues are out there trying to identify folks and mobilize them long-term on their position. So that's kind of where we're at, right? And so going back to this timeline, campaign versus GOTV, campaign, persuasion, identification, GOTV, mobilization, knock and drag, pull your people out to the polls. And then election day is its own unique beast, where you're just blitzing on that one day to get all your folks out, which if you're a Democrat, that means, we'll call it triple Ds. So that's Democrats that have voted in the last 3 elections, or triple Rs, Republicans that have voted 3 times in the last elections, or the people you've identified, and you were just like, go effing vote. So that's what your campaign timeline will usually look like. And a manager is managing against all of these timeline triggers. Okay, so what is a campaign really about? Because I've gotten really ethereal, right? So let me just get really focused. Campaign is about 3 things. It's about the candidate, it's about money, it's about volunteers. If you forget everything I'm talking to you about right now over this hour, what you need is you have a candidate that's going to work hard and do good work. I'm very partial to Stacey Abrams. You're going to go get boatloads of cash. I just noticed in looking at this, for whatever reason, there's Israeli money in this boatload of cash. You can't take foreign money, so I don't want to try to allude to that. I just saw a pile of money. And then you want people to be like making phone calls, knocking on doors, doing whatever they can on the volunteer side. That's it. So we're in the community, you're the state, are you going to look to hire staff? You're going to look to find people based off of whatever thing you're doing. If you are doing a candidate, some candidate work, what you're doing is you're trying to find people that already know that candidate, and you're trying to start with sort of concentric circles out. So the candidate's friends and family, then people that have identified that they love that candidate, then it's organizations that have endorsed that candidate, and you are just kind of always iterating out. So if you're thinking about it from a partisan race perspective, we're in the community recruiting volunteers. If it's a Democrat, you're thinking about left-leaning, progressive, democratic organizations. If it's Republican, right-leaning, endorsing organizations. It's really that simple. So thinking about your community, just take a moment and reflect. If you were running for office, where are the 5 places you would go to first? It's probably your county party. It's probably some Democratic clubs. If your candidate is like super passionate about gun violence prevention or conservation, let's go think about, you'd go to those organizations. So think about what Rep. Talrico already told us, right? He's a former teacher. He talked about conservation and environmentalism, right? Where is he going to go? He's going to go to teachers unions and unions. He's going to go to like environmental conservation groups. So Texas League of Conservation Voters, Sierra Club, Public Citizen. And that's how you start recruiting the volunteers in the network out. By having a bigger network, you're going to have more money, which means you're going to have more volunteers.
Hey Matt, on that note, and the timeline that all of this seems to follow, and how you orchestrate your campaign, we have a question from Aaron regarding the way that COVID-19 has changed the campaign timeline, if it has, especially accounting for the reduction in door knocking, and with the possibility of mail-in ballots in, I guess not Texas, but across the nation, especially.
Yeah, that's a great question too, Aaron. I was literally on a call yesterday with an organization I'm a part of, the Truman National Security Project. I've been a member there for 12 years, and I encourage you all to look into it and also apply when you feel like the time is right for you. It is a organization devoted to Harry Truman's ideals of multinationalism, and I'll take my recruitment hat off for a second. The reason I bring all that up is we were talking about races that were important to us, and one of those races is very obviously Gina Ortiz Jones. Not only is she a member of the Truman National Security Project, she's a congressional candidate, and she just lost by the thinnest of margins last cycle, and decided to run again, which we're really blessed that she did. That all being said, we don't know when or where or how any of this stuff is going to work. We're not going to be able to knock on doors, most likely, right? One of the things we realized too is that by now we usually have a U.S. Senate candidate, and we have MJ Hager running against and Royce West running against John Cornyn. And this week coming into it is the beginning of the Texas Democratic Party, which is also virtual, and it is a very unique situation that we don't have a Senate candidate to rally around, right? And so when we talk about recruiting these volunteers and how do you do this stuff on iterating out when you don't even know who your candidate is, right? Like that's very difficult. But the tactics don't change. Field organizing is still field organizing. You just may not be physically in the field. So instead of doing knocks, you're probably doing text, right? As opposed to doing a boatload of knocks, you're in visual, like visibility type things where you see people holding signs super excitedly. You're probably doing a lot of phone banking, right? I will tell you this, phone banking has never been easier than it is right now. I did some phone banking for a cause the other day, and usually you get 2, 3 people to pick up for every hour, maybe 5 if you're really lucky. Man, I can't get people not to pick up the phone. People are so desperate for human connection. It has been outrageous. So I think what we're going to see is we're going to see an increase in shift to virtual, right? So I'm not an expert in this, but I think you'll see more Facebook ads, more social media ads on a paid level, which means money is more important. But I also think you'll see an ever increasing amount of text messages and phone banking. And then honestly, I think somebody on this call is going to come up with some super clever idea and it's going to work out wonderfully in 2020. And then every campaign is going to do it in 2022, right? Like that's going to happen too, because texting wasn't a thing 4 years ago, not the way it is now. And so we'll also see that iteration go through. So to that point, what does success actually look like? And keep these questions coming. These are great. I love this. Like I said, we're going to finish real short. If y'all don't keep staying engaged, you're super engaged, and that's helpful for me.
You want another one right now, or do you want to keep?
Let's do it, man.
All right,
let's keep doing it.
We got a question coming in regarding choosing an HQ, and also Aaron's question earlier was from Maryland. So that is a national question that you fielded wonderfully, Matt. Presidential campaigns, when they choose their state HQ or their national HQ, how do they do it and why?
So I'm going to take the lens of my experience on presidential campaigns. They usually do it to reinforce a brand of some sort, right? So let's go back to Obama. Obama from Chicago, his national HQ was in Chicago. I mean, it's kind of that simple. Now, there are also historic differences. So FDR famously in his third term, running for his third term, it was norm breaking at that point, right? It was one of those things where he tried to play coy, and it was like this weird thing. And I read recently this wonderful book called The Washington War, that if you're into biographies and World War II and politics, it's a great read. But his strategy was known as the Rose Garden strategy, where he basically ran from the White House. And that's why incumbents tend to have a disproportionate advantage, right? Most presidents win re-election. It is very uncommon that presidents don't win re-election. That is why I think Democrats are really confident that are really aware that it is Trump's race to lose, right? Even with all these headwinds, he's still the incumbent. So when you pick a national headquarters for a political campaign, I'm going to not broaden the answer out. You have to do it with thinking about it as what reinforces a narrative, or where does it build into a nexus of power? I worked on one campaign that was about preventing Arctic National Wildlife Refuge oil drilling. And I got to live for 4 months in the very beautiful and wonderful place. And I think you're all going to think I'm going to say Alaska. The answer is actually I lived in Davenport, Iowa, which is this weird industrial city at the border of Iowa and Illinois. And I was lobbying Jim Nussle, who was the chair of appropriations. So the Alaska Coalition's headquarters wasn't in Alaska, and it wasn't in DC for these campaigns. It was actually in, I think, Minnesota, because it wanted to reinforce the wilderness brand, and it was an easier way to get resources in 2004, 2005, 2006 to the affiliate offices. So you just want to have to think about it that way. And in that sense too, and now I'm getting real verbose. You got to think about these campaigns actually as like startups that end after 9 months, right? And like, how do you marshal your resources? How do you manage your supply chain? How do you make sure that you get everything you need to the places you need? And so that's a bigger question. I'm happy to continue going down that rabbit hole. As you can tell, I love talking about stuff like this. Cole, any other questions coming in?
Let me give you one more that really bleeds into the concept of success. It's two different questions that I'm going to go and combine, and I hope the askers are okay with that. From David and Aryan. David asks, does a good campaign fluctuate its values with public opinion, or does it stick to their convictions? And in parallel, Aryan asks, what is the relationship between campaigns and big data, pollsters, and analysis? And I feel like those two questions bleed into one another fairly well.
I agree with that. And those are, again, these are wonderful questions. So let me start with the first one. My fear is that the answer is yes, but what I aspire to is that no, that your value set is your value set and you should lead with your values. I have quit campaigns and I have fired political clients. I'm sure every Democrat or Republican who has become a consultant at any point in their life will eventually say that if they can't say it now. Look, let me just be as clear as can be and also share my personal politics. I can't work for people right now like the NRA. I can't do it. I just can't, right? I can't work for people, and if you can, God bless you, that's great. But I can't work for people that are putting guns into the hands of people that don't need them. And I say this as a gun owner, and I say this as a rural Texan who hunts, right? That's my value set. It can't be equivocal to me. And I can't support candidates that are pro NRA right now. Just can't do it. You're going to meet a lot of Republicans and a lot of conservative folks who look at my resume and see that I worked for Planned Parenthood, and they'll look at me and go, I can't do that either. So to the first question before we talk about pollsters and like how we do that stuff, and I'm gonna hold that second question as we go through this a little bit more, and I'll bring it back up. I think you're going to find some people are able to say, I don't really feel that strongly about this, and I'll move a little bit. That's fine. Cool. I get it. Evolve. But if you have a strong value set and you're going to change or disagree or hide or lie about your values to win, I can't get behind that either. That's just a personal opinion. So I think the answer is lead by your values, but I fear that in today's day and age in politics, I think honestly, people are looking at polling and shifting their values based on polling. So before we get into polling, because I do want to respond in detail to that question, let's talk about success, and then I'll bring that back through as we talk about sort of how do you refine a narrative. So what does success look like? Defining success is really just know why you ran or joined a campaign. I worked for a lot of losers. I'm a Democrat in Texas. I worked for a lot of losers for a long time. I'm okay with that because we move the ball forward. Going back to, I think it was David's question, understand your values and ideals. If you are a candidate, champion those values and ideals. If you are a supporter or a campaign manager or a volunteer or an advocacy organization, push those volunteers, mobilize on those volunteers. Move your cause or your candidate forward. I can tell you a lot of people that didn't win their first race. Most candidates don't win their first race. Gina Ortiz-Jones, who I mentioned earlier, did not win her first race. I think she is highly likely to win her second race. So if you can get to a spot where you lose by 1 or 2 points, you're probably going to win the next time, right? Famously, Bill Clinton lost his reelection for governor of Arkansas, and then he became president. So he moved his cause forward. Train others and learn from your team. I'm 38 years old now. I'm not nearly as innovative as I was when I first started doing this. When I work on a campaign or when I work for a cause, I'm asking as many questions as I can to learn from other organizations and other people constantly. And at the same time, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life and I've learned a lot of things, and I'm going to move that lesson forward so you all don't have to do it. I think by doing this, you improve your leadership skills. We need more leaders, not followers in this world and this work. So become a leader and be in this for the long term, in one way or another, right? And what I mean by that is, so after I did Progress Texas, my wife famously told me, I hope she's not watching this, that I could be fat or I could be bald. I couldn't be both. And as you can tell, I lost one. And what it really meant was, this is a loving relationship. What it really meant was that I had to take care of myself, because in Progress Texas, I was working about 100 hours a week, every week for about 4 years. So I gained a bunch of weight, got up to over 200 something pounds. And I lost all my hair. Lost my hair because of genetics. It wasn't the job. But I also got burned out. I couldn't work for 9 months. I just couldn't do it. I mean, I was unable to work. And I was afraid that I was never going to be able to go back to that lifestyle and that level of work and be that committed to that kind of work and build organizations. Fortunately, if you fast forward a year, I became the executive director of the Austin Young Chamber of Commerce. I put in big hours again. I turned around that organization. We launched some really cool programs. And then after that, started working on campaigns and nonprofits again. There's a year and a half I wasn't able to work. And so I challenge you all to do really good work, but do it for a really long time if you can. And if that means going on a 2-month vacation, don't feel bad about that. If that means skipping an election cycle, don't feel bad about that. If it means going getting a corporate job for a little bit, don't feel bad about that. That's okay. Because at the end of the day, we need you here when you're 40, 50, 60 years old, not when you're 20 and 30 years old. We want you here for both. So this is how I define success. Now, we're going to talk about learning and growing here in a second to start wrapping this up. But I want to go back to the polling question, because I wanted to define success before talking about polling. I think in today's day and age, what we see a lot is we see a lot of folks looking at polling memos and chasing the voter. I challenge you, now that I've defined success about understanding your values, moving your cause and candidate forward, and training other folks. I challenge you not to chase the voter, but to lead the voter. I challenge you not to chase people and their cause, but to organize and then mobilize. So that way you can change the narrative. I'm going to go back to what Rep. Talrico said. You got to be the change you want to see in the world. I do think that what we see a lot are candidates and campaigns that win on red waves or blue waves, and they serve for 1 term, maybe 2, and then they lose, and they're sitting there going, I don't know why I lost. Well, if you read all the polling memos and you didn't have any intestinal fortitude, and you were campaigning based on the whim of a voter, you're probably not going to be there very long. But if you're nice and you're building some lasting infrastructure and you're probably going to be there much longer. So that's kind of where I stand on that. I don't think you should change your value set based off of public opinion. Cole, I also want to just call back out. Does that answer the heart of what that question was, or did I miss any elements of it since I paused?
From my vantage point, yes. Aryan, and I believe it was David who asked that question. If y'all want to drop in the chat and let us know if that worked out for y'all, if y'all want to follow up, we can double back a little later, Matt.
Cool. Before going into like sort of how will everybody on this call learn and grow, are there any other questions that are kind of pending about like the actual structure of campaigns?
I don't believe on the actual structure. We have a question that is in regard to living well on a campaign, which you just touched on, and I'll go and ask Samantha's question right now, because it's so prudent about success and personal success and personal, well, your ability to live. How do you deal with job insecurity? on the campaign process. And I think personally, I've asked myself that question before. I don't think anyone that's worked on a campaign hasn't asked themselves, especially as she puts it, when you're on a losing campaign.
Yeah.
Want to take that one on, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, look, I lost a lot. I'll lose more, right? I've also won a couple, and that's fun. That's a good feeling too. There's just not a lot of people that do this. And there are a lot of candidates and there's a lot of campaigns, and it is recession proof. So let me just stress, like, there's going to be an election in November, right? Doesn't matter what the economy looks like. There's going to be a recession probably, and there's going to be a campaign probably, right? That's pretty cool. Do good work. Do good work, and your network immediately starts to balloon, because if you become really excited about field, there's not a lot of field people out there. If you get really excited about digital, there's not a lot of digital people out there. So if you do the good work, you should be fine. Excuse me. I'm going to drink some water for a second. The other thing that you all are doing that is not normal, going back to how you are not normal, is you're networking right now with, I don't know, 100, 200, 300 people that are ideologically different from you, but professionally passionate about the same thing. I've called Tyler out a couple of times because he's speaking tomorrow. I consider Tyler a friend, and he and I could not be more ideologically different on most every issue. He will probably say the exact opposite thing of every policy and program issue that I'm saying today. And yet, if given the opportunity, he and I are going to work together one day. I work with a very close friend of mine right now who worked on George Bush's reelection campaign for president. I worked on John Kerry's campaign. You heard a little bit about this again earlier from Reptile Rico. It's easy to say us versus them in a candidate or an issue-based campaign at the moment. But you're part of a fraternity or sorority of people that are not normal and want to mostly work together. And so job stability is really, save your money, be able to not work for 2 or 3 months at a time. But I just don't know a lot of people that were good or passionate about the work that struggled to find campaigns or causes to work for. So, okay, I'm going to move on to learn and grow, and keep these questions brewing, because I want to make sure that we really, really talk about, we get into the weeds on a couple more questions that we didn't cover today. So learn and grow. How will you do that? Honestly, it's pretty simple, right? Just make a difference, however you define that. Lift somebody up, work collaboratively, decide to work 20 or 30 years at this, decide to work on it for 2 or 3 years and go get a corporate job and then donate your money, right? It doesn't matter. But identify the impact you want to make and then make that impact. For me, I want to be the guy behind the scenes. I want to donate the money I can to causes that are important to me. And I want to be doing this when I'm 70 years old. I want to still be that weird old guy in the back making phone calls, telling people why they should go vote. That's the guy I want to be. And I want to do it with all of you. I want to be working on your campaigns, and I want to be working for your causes. Once you define what that is for you, you just got to keep that as your North Star. And your North Star doesn't have to be a linear path. It just is a guide to say, directionally, I want to go this way. So do that. That's how you learn and grow. But I want to just sort of really just say one last thing about me, right? Because I like my favorite topic is me. For me, it's much more fun to run a political campaign than it is to be the candidate. I've toyed with the idea of being a candidate one day, and I just have absolutely no desire. I also think that you need to be a student of political history in a way that if this is the thing you want to do, you got to know that Hunter S. Thompson wrote one of the greatest political books ever, right? Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail. You got to know that the tools out there that are important. You got to figure out ways to bring business practices like sprints or methodologies into a campaign or for a cause or a candidate so you can do it. You have to be comfortable documenting and innovating in a way that most people aren't, and you got to be comfortable doing all of this stuff on a shoestring budget for a really short period of time. And then you have to decide whether or not you want to be in front of the camera or behind the camera. And those are a lot of big questions. But if you can identify those things at the front end, running a campaign is actually pretty easy. It's hard work, but it's the same every time. And that's the thing I want to leave you with, is that once you decide that you want to be a campaign manager, then the thing you got to decide is what things do you want to do to like learn behind the scenes so you can be capable of it. A campaign manager, to go back to it, needs to know research. So that's opposition research. That's landscape analysis. That's research about the district, research about policy. You got to have depth and research. You have to understand communications. You don't have to be a pro, but you got to understand polling. You got to understand how to write that quick 280 character tweet. You have to know, does it go on Twitter or does it go on Facebook? Does it go into a press release? Do you want it in the mass media? Do you do a campaign ad about it? But you have to have some of those insights. And then you got to know a little bit about field. Are you knocking on doors? Are you making phone calls? Are you texting? Oh crap, it's COVID. What do we do now? Should we talk about the recession? Should we be optimistic or pessimistic? When I knock on the door, who do I want knocking on that door? So field is super important. That's how you go from organizing to mobilizing, and that's how you go back from mobilizing to organizing. And then finally, you got to know fundraising. How many hours you got to be on the phone to like make the money you need? Do you go to a PAC? Do you go to a lobbyist? Do you go to friends and family? When do you do friends and family? How much money can a campaign or a candidate write themselves? I've had a candidate mortgage his home to get the campaign started. That was a terrible idea. Don't do that, right? But you got to know those things. And I was too young to not tell him no. So you got to become a generalist if you want to run a campaign or you want to be a candidate, which means that you need that really good specialist that you want to manage underneath you. And that's the hard part. The hard part is just keeping really smart people doing really good work, teaching you, all focused and moving in the same direction. That's campaign management. And with that, I'm going to stop and just say, what other questions do we have? And I'm going to come back and end the presentation so that way I can see all of your beautiful faces, theoretically.
We have one question from, I don't think I've heard of this guy before, Tyler Norris.
Oh, I know that guy.
Tyler Norris asks, Matt, can you talk about expectations people should have as a first-time political staff, workload, pay, etc.? Do you have any thoughts about the more recent efforts to organize political workers and how that might impact campaign budgets and efficiency?
I can't speak to the sort of unionization or the collaboration to bring people into like a campaign union, right? I don't know much about that. It's not from lack of desire, it's from lack of experience right now. Let me tell you how much money I made my first year in political organizing. I'm confident that it's going to scare some of you. I made $19,250 my first year. I had zero expenses though, none. So there's that. As you're getting started, your pay is terrible. I'm just going to own that your pay is terrible, and you're going to eat a ton of pizza, and you're going to eat a lot of like fast food, and people are going to bring you a lot of stuff that you don't want to have in your body. Like just people are going to cook for you that you're just like, what is this? So I'm having flashbacks right now. You don't usually get good benefits and when you first start getting started. So I didn't get healthcare. I didn't get a phone stipend, but I rose really quickly. So when I first started, I was a field organizer. I traveled the country organizing at a pretty senior level, field organizing. And I probably went from very junior to very senior in about 4 years. So the rapid rate at which you can move up is a very real thing. And if you're like, hey, I was a weirdo. I specialized in judicial campaigns and city council races. Well, those campaigns are small enough where I was able to do 2 or 3 at a time. Now, never people that were running against each other, but like somebody would run for County Court at Law 4 and someone would run for County Court at Law 8. Why not work for both of them at the same time? So you got to start being a little creative that way too. I'm also going to lean into my privilege. I am a white, heterosexual, cisgendered male, right? Like I could make those sacrifices to make $19,000 a year. So those are all the things you just have to do as a sort of the political calculation. Now, nonprofits tend to pay better. So if you want to get this experience and also want to work on an issue or an advocacy organization as opposed to a candidate or a cause, that tends to pay a little bit better. And I think that answers the entire question. Yeah, but you're not going to get rich doing this, especially in the first 5 or 10 years.
That was a good answer. And thank you for sharing those early lean years, Matt.
Yeah, it was lean.
We're running short on time, so I'm going to ask one last question, and it's going to be an amalgamation of a few questions. We've had a number of folks asking about picking a candidate, and if you want to be that candidate, do you work on a campaign first? Do you run first? If we were to sort of put these together and mold them into one question, I would ask, from a campaign management standpoint, as you look at a candidate and their viability to run a good race, what are you thinking about? And then I want you to flip and think what your bosses were thinking about when they stared at you.
So if you are thinking about running for office, or you're hiring somebody, am I hearing that question correctly?
Yeah, if there's a table where you sit down and meet one of these would-be office holders, right? What are you thinking about choosing them and working for them and making that a good choice for you, and vice versa? As a candidate looks at you as a campaign manager, what would you advise them to look for?
So when I'm interviewing candidates that are running for office, the very first thing I'm looking at is their commitment. Very first thing. Nothing else matters at that point for me. If they're not willing to make fundraising calls, if they're not willing to knock on doors, if they tell me stuff like, my number one priority is my current job, my number two priority is my family, my number three priority is my friends, and my number four priority is, playing with my puppy, and now the campaign is the fifth priority, right? Or sixth, the value set doesn't matter at that point, because you're just not going to win. Like, again, for a lot of people, especially first-time candidates, it's you have your full-time job, then you have your full-time family, and then you have this full-time campaign, right? So you have 3 full-time jobs. So if you're not willing to be working 3 full-time jobs, you just can't win, especially if you've got to go beat an incumbent. Exceptions to every rule. Now, let's assume that they do have the capacity to do it. They're like, look, this is the thing I'm going to do. I'm taking a leave from my job, or my wife and my kids are going to come knocking on doors with me, or whatever. But they signal that they're committed to the experience. Then I'm starting to ask value questions. And you can ask those questions as direct as you want, or indirect. If you're new to the world, don't feel like you got to be direct. That comes with age, right? That comes with experience, and you feel like you can do it. But I feel comfortable at this point being like, so where do you stand on choice? If I'm working on a state rep or a congressional campaign, where do you stand on gun violence prevention? Tell me about racial equity and what that means for you. I'm going to have those conversations. I don't need them to bat 1,000, right? I'm a baseball fan. I'm a huge baseball fan. I don't need them to hit every time they go to the plate. What I do need them to do is to be on the same team as me, right? They still got to be on the same team. And if they can have a bad day, and I may want to dig in and be like, look, you really struck out on that one. I got more questions than answers. Let's have this other conversation. But I think we're aligned. Cool. So if their values aligned and they're going to do the work, I'm going to go work for them. And then all of a sudden, yeah, it's like every other thing, right? Then now you're negotiating on price and time and hours and all that other stuff. So yes, you should do that too. But usually, if those two things come up, we're probably pretty good. To the part about whether or not you should think about running for office, I'm going to go back to the very beginning of this presentation, which I think all of you all get. And if you don't, for whatever reason, I'll be in Slack with you all weekend. You got to ask those questions, whether it's a right fit for you. And if it is a right fit for you, I don't care that you've never run for office before. If you've never run for office, go run for office. Like, we need every race ran, right? Like, I hate uncontested primaries and uncontested general elections. I hate it. I hate it when the Democrats have nobody that they put up. I hate when Republicans have nobody when they put it up. I think that now I'm taking my Democratic hat off. I think one of the worst and hardest things for the electoral process right now is that the left has gone further to the left and the right has gone further to the right. Like, it just means we're not doing anything. I don't know if you saw this, but Mitch McConnell today said that they're going to pass one more COVID relief bill, and that's it. Like, he's done. He's the Senate Majority Leader, and that's the last he's going to do. It doesn't matter how bad things get. If it becomes the Great Depression of 2020, Mitch McConnell is saying he's done. That's messed up, right? And so I say that because I think challenging people on an issue or a thing that they've said and holding them accountable is good. I think that's good. You got to make people accountable. I think if you haven't got the experience and you lose, but if you get the issue up there, you still won, right? So this goes back to like defining success. If success is binary and it's winning the race or losing the race, you're going to probably be unhappy. But if you get in the race because, like AOC did, she just wanted to hold somebody accountable. Well, she also took out the third highest ranking Democrat in the House and became one of the most influential left-leaning young voices in the House. That seems pretty good. But if she had not won, she still would have held that elected official and made them accountable. And that's good too. So, again, that's a nuanced question. If you want to go into more of it, regardless of your party or partisanship, feel free to reach out to me at all this weekend. I think Rep. Talrico would be a great resource. I encourage you to reach out to him. He invited you to do so. You're going to get that invitation a lot. There are folks on this call, Cole, Katia, Bianca, that I've offered that to before campaign bootcamp and after campaign bootcamp, and they've taken me up on it. I encourage you to do the same thing because those are not empty offers, and we can talk about your nuanced and specific situation as well. But I encourage you all to run a campaign or run for office.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was an amazing answer, and I would argue pretty nuanced. We're gonna, God, there's so many good questions. Guys, please get on our Slack. I put a link in the chat, and Matt is already on there, so ask him questions, and hold him accountable to that offer. I'm gonna go ahead and wrap on up. Matt, you said you wanted to close the presentation. If you have any last words, please give them to us. And other than that, we will go ahead and break for lunch. We'll be back at 1 p.m. with Nancy Bosker. And I hope to see all y'all here. We're not going to close the webinar. So just stick around. There'll be a sweet PowerPoint playing in the background, and keep your windows open. Matt, any last words?
I want to just leave you all with, please find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, email, my email. I'll put it all into the chat as well. But please do not be a stranger. This is my favorite group to hire from. This is my favorite group to work with. This is my favorite group to work for. You all are all-stars, and I'm so humbled and honored to be a small part of your weekend. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Matt. Like I said, hop onto that Slack, give some Q&As to Matt. He will guarantee, I guarantee you he'll be on there Monday at 1, this upcoming Monday at 1 p.m., along with all of our other participants. There's a link to the worksheets coming up in the chat. There's a link to the Slack already there. Reach out to me if you have any questions regarding programming. Drop questions in the chat, and I'll try to answer them as well. Again, tune back in for 1 p.m. I saw an awesome question about fundraising. Nancy, she recorded her presentation, but she still covers everything under the sun and does it very well. Meet us back here in 45 minutes, and we'll pick up where we left off. Thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy y'all's lunch.